I'm going to call the Rehab and Social Services Committee to order. I want to thank my colleagues for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us today. And I would also like the clerk to call the roll. Ms. Griffin.
Senator Hanger.
Here.
Senator McDougall. Senator Reed.
Here. McDougall's here.
Senator Chafin. Senator Cosgrove. Senator Servo.
Here.
Senator Deesa. Senator McPike.
Here.
Senator Sproul.
Here.
Senator Mason.
Here.
Senator Boysko.
Here.
Senator Morrissey. Senator Favola.
Okay, we have a quorum, as I have been counting. Just a few quick announcements. We will have 4 presentations this morning. First from Ken Stolley, and then Valerie Boykin, Valerie Slater, and then Harold Clark. I would just ask my colleagues to put your microphone on mute if you're not speaking, just so we can reduce the background noise. We are live streaming this, and we want to have as clear a voice background as possible. And then I do want to welcome those who may be viewing us through our live stream mechanism. I hope you find the information presented here helpful. If you do wish to provide public comment to the Rehab and Social Services Committee on any of the topics discussed, please go to the email, which is public_comment@senate.virginia.gov, and we will post that email at the bottom of the screen. Without further ado, I will move to our first speaker, and it is Sheriff Stolley. Thank you for joining us. Sheriff Stolley is the Sheriff of Virginia Beach. He's serving his 3rd term as sheriff, and he previously served in the Virginia Senate as the Republican leader pro tem, and you were representing the 8th senatorial district. I believe that's the eastern half of Virginia Beach. Prior to being elected to the Senate, Sheriff Stolley was a partner with the Virginia Beach law firm of Bennett and Stolley. You were a sergeant, or Mr. Stolley was a sergeant in the Virginia Police Department, and he served as an intelligence officer in the United States Navy Reserve. Forgive me. Over the past decade, you've been a leading advocate for public safety at the state and local levels, and you've been recognized by the Virginia, Sheriff Stolley has been recognized by the Virginia Sheriff's Association, Fraternal Order of Police, Campus Law Enforcement Administrators, the Chiefs of Police, and the State Police Association. So, quite a distinguished record. Welcome. We look forward to hearing your remarks, and you will be speaking to us on diversion.
All right, thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for inviting me to other members of the committee to talk to you today about diversion in criminal justice. As you may already know, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease 13 years ago, and sometimes it affects my speech. So if you have trouble hearing me or understanding me, please let me know. The reform of the criminal justice system and diversion and the reform of the court system is not new. These issues have been discussed. We've been discussing police reform and criminal justice reform for as long as I can remember, long before the death of George Floyd 2 months ago. As someone who has enforced the law, practiced the law for over, someone who's enforced the law, made the law, and practiced the law for over 40 years, I am in a unique position to talk to you about these issues, and I appreciate your time. The Senate of Virginia has always taken the lead on most of the most pressing issues of our day, and I know that it will do the same with this. I'm confident you'll take the lead on this topic and base your decisions on fact rather than emotions. First, a brief history of diversion. When the General Assembly abolished parole in 1995, it was estimated that we needed 48,000 prison beds. We had a total of 30,000 prison beds at that time in our system. And we needed to go up to 48,000 to accommodate the new people that were being arrested under the abolition of parole or sentenced under the abolition of parole. To reduce that number, the bill required 25% of the offenders to be diverted from the state penitentiary system. And that's when pretrial diversion started. And it was even more successful than we expected. We were able to remove 35% of the offenders from the pretrial, 35% of the prisoners from the state prison system, which now has 27,000 prisoners in there. So we didn't increase the numbers. We may have gone up a little bit over the past years, but for the most part, we've decreased through our diversion program and our pretrial programs the number of inmates awaiting trial and in prison. There are two types of diversion from the criminal justice system. For example, when an officer with a crisis intervention team takes a mentally ill person to a mental hospital rather than to the jail, that results in them getting help outside the criminal justice system. And then the second form of diversion is out of jail or out of prison. That is where we get people out of jail while they're awaiting trial, provide alternative sentencing options for them post-trial, and provide mental health treatment to keep them out of jail in the future. Diversion programs are the key to reforming our criminal justice system and making it more equitable for everyone. All right, Madam Chairman, can you see the slides now?
Yes, Sheriff Stolle, we can see the slides.
All right, thank you. All right. The first component of diversion that needs to be expanded is probation and pretrial services. Pretrial services allow us to evaluate each offender and each offender's risk to the community and risk of failing to appear in court, and monitor them outside the confines of jail while they await trial. But 33 out of our 133 locations do not have these services. Those without are mostly rural areas. In Virginia Beach, we are lucky to have a very good pretrial program here. But that means an offender charged with a crime may be allowed to remain free while they await trial, while an offender charged with the same crime in Isle of Wight would have to sit in jail. That's why pretrial incarceration rates in rural Virginia have doubled over the past 20 years and are now twice the pretrial incarceration rates of suburban and urban areas. This has occurred while crime rates have plummeted. This creates an equity in our system, not an equity based on race and an equity based on funding. You can fix that. Pretrial services need to be funded statewide. The current budget includes $2.3 million in the second year to expand these services. I ask that you keep that funding in place and increase it in the future. I believe this will ultimately create substantial savings for everyone, including sheriffs, because fewer people will be incarcerated pre-trial, and it costs about $2 to $3 a day for someone to be on pretrial services, but an average of $85 a day to keep somebody on in the jail. Second, we need to decide who we're afraid of and who we're mad at, and only incarcerate those people who are afraid of. I believe that we should only lock up those people who are charged or convicted of a crime that threatens public safety. Those are the people that we're afraid of, or the convicts that we're afraid of. We need to find alternative we need to find sentencing alternatives for nonviolent offenders, such as those who have committed a property crime or battle addiction. Those are the people that we're mad at. We can't afford to keep building prisons for people that we're mad at when we don't need to incarcerate them. The population of this is something I've been working on throughout my tenure as sheriff, but COVID-19 took our efforts to another level. The population of the Virginia Beach Correctional Center today is just over 1,000 inmates. When the pandemic started, it was over 1,300 inmates. We reduced our jail population by 20% in response to the COVID-19 pandemic without any detrimental impact to public safety. The reduction was accomplished in two ways. We released nonviolent offenders with 90 days or less to serve in our electronic home incarceration program. The second way, we worked with the Virginia Beach Police Department, the Magistrate's Office, the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, judges, and pretrial services to ensure that we only locked up offenders who posed a threat to our community. The rest were released on summonses or on bond. This is the distinction between who we're afraid of and who we're mad at. As a result, we reduced our population by 20%, and new admissions were reduced by 50% between April and June of this year compared April to June of 2019. Lastly, we need mental health funding. If you want to reform the criminal justice system, you have to start with mental health funding. There's no other issues. There's no other issues that are important or as pressing on corrections today as mental health funding. Recently, you all approved a $3 million 3-year grant for a new mental health program at the Virginia Beach Jail. That program brought the Virginia Beach Community Service Board into the jail and integrated our mental health services here. Here's what the money brought, the $3 million brought. 9 clinicians and peer specialists who work full-time in the jail. I should note that this money was given to the Virginia Beach Sheriff's Office to manage the program, but we turned it over to Health and Human Services because that's where the employees needed to be. And we weren't required to do that, but we thought that's what we needed to do. And so we did that. As part of their job, they evaluate all of our entries into admissions into the jail. And they started the program, and they 781 inmates were screened with 649 qualifying for behavioral health services. This is not the behavioral health services that I make up. This is the state's requirements for behavioral health services. And that represents 83% of the inmates that came into our jail required mental health services and qualified under the state definition for mental health services. A preliminary success rate of 95%, which means 95% of the inmates who were discharged after receiving behavioral health services through this program did not return to jail, a recidivism rate of just 5%. This worked because we have an outstanding department in the human services in Virginia Beach. But let me put these numbers in perspective. 10 years ago, when I first got elected as sheriff, I went to the Community Service Board and asked them to take over our mental health treatment inside the jail. And I told them I believed about 35% of our inmates were mentally ill. They did an evaluation, and they determined that they thought about 10% of our inmates were mentally ill. Fast forward to today, and now we know that by the CSB's numbers, because they're doing the evaluations, more than 80% suffer from mental illness, which is far higher than any of us expected. And more importantly, when you study the recidivism rate for mentally ill and mentally ill inmates in the past, it was almost 100%. Again, the recidivism rate's almost 100%. This program, even though it has only been fully operational for a few months and had a small number of discharges, 27 people, it has completely reversed the trends. To me, that's nothing short of a miracle, and a miracle that we can and should replicate throughout the state of Virginia. The challenges for you to find the funding to do this. And again, let me say that 80%. If I got 1,000 inmates in here, 80% of my population is 800 inmates, and some need to be in prison and jail, but not all of them. And so I think using the jails for the repository for mentally ill is a bad idea. But if we're going to do that, and I don't see any way around that, we need to provide mental health treatment for them. And I think that there's some recent case law that requires that to happen out of the western part of the state of Virginia. And so I think we don't have a choice in the matter. I think that mental health is the same as medical needs under the statute, and we have to provide those services to the individuals. In the past, how is this miracle accomplished? By integrating the CSBs into the jail, we were able to provide better screening of our inmates and mental health problems and the continuum of care when they were released. In the past, those inmates would have left the jail with a few days worth of medication and a follow-up counseling appointment, sometimes weeks out. By then, they were out of medication and unlikely to show up to their appointment. Housing was also an issue. The return to jail was inevitable. Now they leave with an adequate supply of medication and the same week appointment for follow-up behavioral health services. In addition, 85% leave with housing in place, and 100% are connected to benefits such as Medicaid and food stamps. As we really connect, as we really did, what we really did was we connected the services that had already existed in our community, reduced red tape, closed the loopholes for many of the inmates that fell through the cracks, and it is changing everything. And if you think about this, if you think about 80% of your inmates being mentally ill, we're doing everything wrong. Everything we're doing is wrong. We got it. We have to, you can't rehabilitate the mentally ill. You got to treat the mentally ill, and you can't rehabilitate the criminals. You can't treat the criminals. You got to rehabilitate them. And if 85% of our inmates have mental illness problems, a lot of what we're doing is just going out the window. It's a waste of money and a waste of time. And so I think that these are the three areas of diversion that you need to focus on. And when you're talking about reforming the criminal justice system, I think these are the most important issues. You know, with pretrial, you're eliminating all of these programs, eliminate or remove people from our jail services and where our jails or our prisons. And so I think that, you know, Harold's going to speak about reentry programs. And so I'm not going to touch on that, but we have a very, very aggressive reentry program down here as well. And I think that, you know, if you're talking about prison reform or criminal justice reform, you have to start by reducing the number of recidivism rates or the recidivism rates in Virginia. And the way to do that is to focus on things that we know work, like reentry. We need to focus on pretrial, diversion, and the mentally ill. And here's the rub. All this costs money, but fewer people locked up saves money while also reducing mass incarceration. It costs $90 a day to house somebody in the Virginia Beach jail. So reducing the population by 300 people could save taxpayers millions of dollars. In addition, you can't put a dollar amount on the value of having someone out in the community working and supporting their family instead of sitting idly in a jail cell on the taxpayer's dime. We need more funding for pretrial services, more funding for alternatives to incarceration, and more funding for mental health. If you do this based on the results, we say in Virginia Beach will impact more than 80% of the inmates in local jails. We need more funding for education and housing, because we know sometimes someone who drops out of high school is 3.5 times more likely to be arrested than a high school graduate. But funding should not come from law enforcement. To defund and reduce the funding for police officers or law enforcement would defund public safety, and as a result, in a less safe Virginia, where more people become victims of crime. Instead, we need a better trained, better educated police force, which also costs more money. We need to fund the programs that work. Your challenge is to find the money, and which challenge I do not envy you, especially given the impact of COVID-19. And I'll tell you that, let me go to this and I'll speak on that in a minute. On an ending note, I want to address the issue of police reform and criminal justice reform. The criminal justice system is a work in progress. It has always been a work in progress and will always be a work in progress. The system has to evolve and adapt with the societal changes, new laws, and new case law. However, I disagree that the police in Virginia are racist and that the police brutality is a systematic problem here. I only have my experience to draw on, but that experience is pretty extensive. I live and breathe these issues every day, and I still believe that the incidents of police misconduct in Virginia are few, and that those officers are held accountable when they act out of the scope of their employment. I think to buy into this idea that police are systematically racist means to indict the whole system, yourselves included. It would mean that we all are deliberately condoning and perpetuating racism and empowering police to do the same, because they act on our authority and enforce our laws. To buy into this idea, it condemns everyone: the Department of Justice, the governor, the attorney general, the General Assembly, the judiciary, the Commonwealth attorneys, the magistrates, sheriffs like me, and yes, the police. For this to happen, it would mean that either a conspiracy or indifference on a massive scale. And in my 40 years, I've never seen anything to support this idea. And why are we having this conversation now, a discussion now? Why don't you all love us anymore? What changed from just a few months ago when cops were still heroes? We're having this discussion now because officers 1,300 miles away took a man's life in Minneapolis. They were wrong. They should be prosecuted, and they are being prosecuted. Every cop and deputy I know agrees with that. Nothing like that happened here in Virginia to condemn police in Virginia for the crimes those officers would be like. Nothing in Virginia has happened like this. And to me, it'd be like my wife divorcing me because my neighbor's husband cheated on his wife. And I think that's crazy. And so I think that we have to be very efficient in what we do. And it makes no sense at all. The good officers should have to pay the price for the bad ones. Not only that, but police are part of a massive system. Singling them out for reform and ignoring the larger system that they operate in is futile. It will appease only the anti-law enforcement groups and accomplish nothing. Let me go on a little bit more about this. I think that we have a system in the United States, a justice system in the United States is just not the police or the deputy sheriffs or the enforcement branch. I think one of the problems with this, and I think we're very close to having a failed system, correctional system, is I think we're losing touch with the rule of law. And I think that we need to reinforce the rule of law. But, you know, you can't just single out the police officers and say the police officers are acting appropriately. There are some police officers that are acting appropriately. But I think that what we have is a whole system that is in jeopardy of being torn down because a few bad apples have spoiled the atmosphere. However, notwithstanding this, I do support greater police transparency and accountability. For that reason, I've asked the Human Rights Commission here in Virginia Beach to review our use of force policies and to review our use of force incident reports on a regular basis. They've agreed to do so. I look forward to their insight and suggestions, and I think that they will make us a better organization. However, I'll never support giving a citizens group the disciplinary authority over my deputies. The voters elected me to hold my deputies accountable, and I consider that one of my greatest responsibilities. One of the things I haven't heard very much in this debate is the word justice. Lady Justice is the symbol of the criminal justice system. Her blindfold represents impartiality, the idea that justice should be applied without regard to wealth, power, status, race, or gender. Our justice system is imperfect and at times falls short of that ideal, and understand how minorities may have the perception that the system doesn't work for them. And to bring this home, I want to tell you two stories or two issues. When I go into court, I'm very aware of how the color of everybody's skin is in there. And I think that if I were a black man and I went into court and I had a white judge, a white prosecutor, a white defense attorney, and a white bailiff, I'd be very concerned that this is not my criminal justice system. And I can see that, and that's why I try and put as many deputies of color in that court system. But I don't think we have enough black judges. I don't think we have enough minority judges, and I think we need to do more about that. And that's something you can do something about. And so I think that I am aware that the fact that the justice is blind, but it's not blind through the eyes of a defendant who goes into court and thinks that they're not going to get a fair shake because everybody in there doesn't look like them. The next thing I want to tell you about is a story that happened when I was chairman of the Courts of Justice Committee about 15 years ago. I had a group of 13 people come in to see me, and they wanted to talk about keeping data, much like the bill that you passed this year on race and traffic stops and arrests and stuff like that. And I was opposed to that because I thought it didn't work and would not work. And so they came in. I was the chairman of the Courts of Justice Committee, and that's where it died almost every year. And so they came in to see me, and they sat down in my conference room in my law office, and they said, we want to talk about these statistics. And I said, I don't support doing that, but I'll listen to what you have to say. And so I said, I listened to what they had to say, and they supported the statistics because they thought there was a bias in based police. And I'll tell you, by the way, the first time I ever heard driving while black was when I was a senator. I've been a law enforcement officer for 11 years. Never heard that as a law enforcement officer. The first time I ever heard that was Senator Edwards brought it up in a rehab meeting, and just try and say that was a big issue in police work. And I'd never heard that. I've been a police officer for 11 years. But these 13 people came in, and they were concerned about racial profiling and things of that nature, which I understand. They had a perception that there was a problem there. But I went around the room and I went to everyone and I said, tell me your story. And so everyone told me their story. Every one of them had been stopped by a police officer, and every one of them admitted to committing the violation. But they indicated they were convinced that they were stopped because they were based on race or bias. And so even I had one white man in there, one white woman in there, and the white man thought he was stopped. The white man thought he was stopped because he was gay, and the white woman thought she was stopped because she was a naval officer's wife. And so it dawned on me when I was in there that it didn't matter whether or not I thought there was a problem there or not. These people believed that there was a problem, and perception is reality a lot of times in law enforcement. And so I went to them and I said, what do we need to, let's assume that we collected all this data and it shows what you think it shows. It's going to show. What do you want us to do? And they said, we want training in the police academy on bias-based policing and things of that nature. So I said, you write up the training that you need in police academies, and I'll introduce it as a bill. So I introduced it as a bill, and it became law. And so that's why we have training about bias-based policing in the police academies now. And so, but the reason I'm telling that story is it dawned on me that a lot of times perception is reality. And even if I thought there wasn't a problem there, the perception that there is a problem there creates a huge problem that needs to be dealt with. And so I think that you all have that's your challenge right now. The good news is that we know how to fix the problem. Your task is to pass good common sense legislation based on fact, not emotion or perception. And it's difficult to separate perception from reality, but I think that's what you have to do. That's why you get paid the big bucks to be up there in the Senate and do those things. I think that that'll improve the system without impeding the ability of law enforcement to keep people safe. If you want to reform the criminal justice system, you need to decide what the goals are of the system, not the police or the sheriff or the Commonwealth attorney or the Court of Appeals. You need to decide what the goals are of the system and fund those goals. You can't fund indiscriminately different police organizations and the Commonwealth Attorney's Office and pretrial indiscriminately like we have done in the past. And I'm just as guilty as anybody having done that. But you can't do that and expect the system to work. The system doesn't work if you indiscriminately fund it. Corrections might work good for a while. Pretrial might work good for a while, but the system has no goals right now. And the police department has the goals of reducing crime and solving crime. The sheriff's office has goals of maintaining the courthouse and law enforcement in some area, and in other areas they have in Virginia Beach they have court operations and corrections operations. But there's no consistency in the goals that are being put forward in anything that I've seen. And so I think that you have to set goals and times to achieve those goals and fund those processes that need to be funded. And it has to be done as a system, not as an individual process. And I can go on and on about that forever. But we know that diversion programs and mental health programs work. We've proven that in Virginia Beach. They help everyone, regardless of their race, their gender, or how much they have in their bank account. Fund these programs and you'll change everything for everybody forever. And I think that that concludes my comments. I'll be happy to respond to any questions that y'all have, but that concludes my comments.
Thank you, Sheriff Stolle. I see a question from one of my colleagues, Senator Sorville.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Sheriff Stolle, I'm impressed to hear that you're now on what sounds like your fourth career, 3 out of 4 of which in public service. And didn't realize you had a career as a lawyer as well. That's news to me. So yeah. Impressed by all your public service. Not
everybody's impressed with the fact that I was an attorney, but yeah, my mother is, so that's important.
Okay, good. Y'all got to have happy mothers, proud mothers. Yeah. Two things I just wanted to say. First is a statement, and the other one is a question. So, first of all, I was a little surprised by your statement about a lack of problems with policing in Virginia, and I would just encourage you, if you have a moment this morning, to Google the names of Derek Thompson, Trooper Hewitt, Hewitt, Lamonta Gladney, and Tyler Timberlake. Derek Thompson was a man who lived, I think, either in my district or Senator McPike's district. I'm not sure. But there was a video last week of him being ripped out of a car by his neck while 3 state troopers sat there and watched and didn't do anything while he was nonviolently indicating he didn't want to get out of a car. I thought it was outrageous, completely inappropriate. It did not reflect appropriate policing. The commandant, the colonel of the state police said that. Brian Moran said it. And the other name I gave you is a gentleman in Fairfax County who was my constituent in Gum Springs, African-American man who was undergoing either a mental health crisis or some sort of a drug-induced situation. And the Fairfax County police tased him completely out of the blue while he was threatening nobody and doing nothing except wandering around and muttering. I would encourage you to go watch those 2 videos that came from Virginia, not Minnesota, and contemplate those as part of your views on this. But what I was particularly stricken by what you said earlier was the difference between the cost of pretrial diversion and incarceration. I think you said incarceration is like $85 a day, and pretrial, I think you said, is like 15 or something.
Three or four.
Yeah. Okay. $3 or $4. Right. And I think you said that 35 localities do not have pretrial services.
33. That's
33.
Right, 33 localities. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. And
133 have them. 33 don't have them.
Got it. So I had two possible solutions to that. I wanted to see what your thoughts were about. Number one was, and given that you were involved in parole reform or abolition of parole when it happened, when parole was abolished, part of what we or what you all created, was a system under the sentencing guidelines where people were evaluated for non-incarceration diversion based on a lot of different variables. And it was an evidence-based algorithm which comes up with a score which tells a judge that this person doesn't need to go to prison to solve their problem.
Right.
And the Washington Post had an article about a year ago based on a University of Texas study, which showed that there was a significant number of judges in Virginia that were refusing to pay any attention to that algorithm and putting people in jail anyway. And one of the reactions we got during the testimony on my bill in the Senate was that the reason for that might have been because some localities don't have adequate diversion services, and so the judges might not have that option available. So my first question was whether or not you saw any evidence of that in Virginia Beach, and or whether you've heard of that from sheriffs around the state. And then my second question was, as you know, the state reimburses localities for a portion of state responsible inmates that are under the sheriff's care in your jail. And I was curious what you would think if we conditioned those payments for state responsible inmates on having a locally funded pretrial diversion program, given that there seems to be a direct tie between diversion costs and incarceration costs. It seems to me if we incentivized our localities to create a pretrial diversion program, the state might not have to pay so much to reimburse them for being incarcerated in your jail. I was wondering what you thought about those two ideas.
All right, let me first off address the names that you asked me to pull up and take a look. I'll look at those videos, but I think you got to look at everything that surrounds it. You need an investigation in that, and I'm not sure what happened in those two cases. I'll look at those, Senator, and take a look at them. But I've been in those situations. I've had to use force, and I've had deadly force used against me. And so I think that putting yourself in the place of a police officer that is taking somebody out of a car and assuming that you know all the facts that are taking place there is a mistake. I think that, and so I think that it may not be justified. It might be justified, but I think you got to have investigation. I think that's what happens in Virginia. I think that if somebody misperforms or mistreats an individual, there's an investigation that's done, and that investigation can be done by the Crime Commission, can be done by the Attorney General, can be done by the local police department, the state police. Anybody can do that investigation and determine whether it's right or wrong. And I think what you find in Virginia, those people are held accountable for exceeding their authority or the scope of their authority. And there's been all this talk about qualified immunity. Qualified immunity doesn't apply if somebody actually on the scope of their job or their training. And so, these police officers don't go out there with immunity and just do whatever they want to do. I think that there's accountability, and I think that we need to recognize that as you go ahead and address these statutes. Now, and these are isolated incidents. I saw somewhere where the police have millions of contact every year, and I can't remember how many millions of contact every year with the citizens. And of those contacts, a few handful of mistreatment takes place, and you can't condone that, and I don't condone that. But it's less than 1% of those contacts resort to use of force, and then the misconduct is far less than that. And so it's not a prevailing problem in Virginia. And I don't know about Minnesota, but to judge everybody on what was on the TV and videos of what happened in Minnesota is not accurate. And I think you can't just cite when you cite a problem, you need to cite what the outcome of that problem is too, whether the police took action, and if they took action, it's not being condoned by the police, and so or by the city or the state or anybody else. And so now, as to your other question, and if I understand your other question, it had to do with whether or not whether or not the state could divest themselves of some of the responsibility for funding the pretrial services by per diem reimbursement. Is that correct?
If a locality does not maintain a locally funded pretrial services division.
All right. Well, I think that when you look at the criminal justice system, the per diem reimbursement is paying us is the only pay that we get for holding these prisoners in jail. And so, if you cut the funding for this, you're cutting the services that the jails can provide the inmates. And there's not a hell of a lot of money that you give or the state gives for services for inmates in the first place. But I think it'd be inappropriate to cut funding that's not related to the topic for pretrial services. In other words, I think if it costs me so much money to run the jail and the state's share of that is 30%, then I think that per diem reimbursement ought to be up to 30%. And so I think that, I think we did this when I was in the Senate. We funded DMV, and we took half the money DMV got every year and put it into criminal justice or some other programs. And we did not fund DMV with it. So I think anytime you're taking money away from a source that's intended for or putting conditions on that source, you're screwing up the system. And so I think the per diem reimbursement ought to be based on the number of inmates that the sheriff has or the regional jail has, and not on some other performance that the sheriff has no control over. Because I can't control whether the city of Virginia Beach initiates or funds, or the state of Virginia funds a good mental health program or a pre-entry program and stuff like that. Now, I've taken it upon myself to find funding for these programs. I have a program that I have the canteen, and I also have the canteen internet canteen. And I put $1 fee on the internet canteen to fund my reentry program, and another $1 for other programs that are here. And so I think that's how I fund my canteen, or how I fund my programs. But if you cut the per diem reimbursement, I have to cut those programs. And so I don't think the per diem reimbursement should be tied to it. Now, I think it's not a bad idea to tie funding. 599 money is tied to the cities having the ability to do condemnation for annexation. And so I think that's tied for that money, but you might be able to do that with 599 money, or there are some courthouse fees that you could probably do that with. The sheriff has a administration fee and a security fee. You all just voted to raise that from $10 to $20. And so I think that, that could be something that you could add to, or just detract from, or take some money from to pay for the pretrial services. But I think pretrial services is a state function. And I think that, maybe the cities have a responsibility there too. I think they do. And I don't know what percentage the cities have of our pretrial function here, but
different localities assist with it. Some
But
localities.
I think I got this wrong earlier. I reversed the numbers. There are 133. Jurisdictions that don't have pretrial services, and only 33 that have pretrial services.
33.
I'm sorry, I was right the first time. Yeah, I got too much information coming into me. 33 do have it. 133 have it, but 33 don't have it.
33 down.
Okay, yeah, okay. So too much information overload here. So
Thank you, Sheriff Stolle. That was a very detailed explanation. Are there any further questions for Sheriff Stolle? And the full presentation will be available to all senators. And did I see Senator Mason's hand up? Senator Mason.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple of quick ones. Sheriff Stolle, thanks for being here. It's always good to see you, sir. Does Virginia Beach have a mental health docket?
yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and it's pretty aggressive mental health docket as well. But when I was a senator, I opposed all those, but because I thought that it was a way to get the state and the funding that the federal courts should be funding. But I think that now I reconsider that. Hey, Lionel, how you doing? And I reconsider that, and I think that the mental health docket and a drug docket is a good thing to have. And so I think it provides services that should be provided by other people. The judges shouldn't be doing that, but I think it's a good thing to have.
Senator Mason, you have a second.
Just two more quick ones. One, I remember when you came to our committee and initially proposed this, turning the system of the mental health over to CSBs, and they didn't feel like that it was properly funded. I don't know how long it's been going on, but if they were here and talking about it, how do they feel that this is going?
They're ecstatic about what's going on down here, and they think that it's a great thing, and they're apologetic that it took 10 years to make it happen. But I think they're great partners in this, and we see eye to eye on all of this, and it's a great program. And I think you have to be touched to be concerned about the mentally ill. I don't think people that haven't been touched by the mentally ill understand the issue or take the time to understand it. And I think I was touched when I was on the Senate Finance Committee and had to deal with Health and Human Services. But I think you have to be touched by it. And I think that it's very important that we do mental health in the jails and around this, and the state meets its obligation.
It's a
Agree. And finally, sir, yesterday, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, last one.
Senator Mason.
Finally, yesterday, some of us received an email, a letter from the Department of Behavioral Health and the Secretary talking about the crisis with private hospitals not taking enough TDOs. This has been ongoing. I understand the hospitals, probably particularly in Virginia Beach, are under serious pressure right now. It's a hotspot. But from your seat, are you able to see whether private hospitals are taking their share of TDOs in Virginia Beach, or is that something you have a window of view of?
I think I have a limited view of that, but I think that they're taking they take what they consider their obligation to take. But I think that, you know, we got to make more beds available, and you know, I think that, you know, the Decree Deeds Commission did a lot of good for Virginia, but I think it just organized how many beds we have. I don't think it expanded the beds that we have, and so I think that, you know, we need to do something more in the mental health, and you know, we're trying to do it. And I had more time, I talked to you, and I know the chairman's probably getting upset that I'm going on so long, but I think that if I had more time to talk to you about what I think we need to do, and I think our criminal justice system is almost on the brink of failure, and so I think we need to reform it. I think it needs to be done as soon as possible.
And Senator, you can always have offline conversations. Sheriff Stolle will make himself available to answer any further questions. Senator Spruill, did you have your hand up?
Yes, just a comment to the sheriff. The sheriff office in Virginia Beach, Norfolk, and Chesapeake that I know of, the sheriff office, they are doing a fine job, but there's a difference between the sheriff office and the police department. I'm hearing what the sheriff is saying. For example, wearing the body cameras, for example. How many? You have a lot of bad policemen out there. You have some good ones as well. But also, until the cell phone, the people who've been catching this stuff online with the cell phone and not wearing the body cameras, to me, we should not stop funding the police department. Please don't do that. Right. But you have a lot of bad apples out there. So, Sheriff, your office and Chesapeake that I know about in Norfolk, y'all are doing a fine job. But what y'all are doing as far as sheriffs are different from the police department. You have some bad apples out there. I don't know whether they're getting proper training, some of the police department. So I think they need to be trained as well. As far as the judge is concerned, I do agree that we should have some more judges of color. But to me, regardless of what the color of a judge may be, the key is that judge should obey what the law says. For example, if, not being a lawyer now, but if the court says that somebody take an apple and you get 2 years, some judges, especially the older judges, I get nervous as hell when I'm hearing that a young person, a black person, go up for a judge that's been there for a long time, because sometimes they go beyond the scope of what they should say. So the sheriff's department is doing a great job. Your sheriff's department is different from the police department. So I want you to understand that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Spruill. We have another question for you, Sheriff Stolle, and it is from Senator Kiggins.
Thank you, Senator Favola, and thank you, Sheriff Stolle, very much for your wonderful brief and for all your community service. And I've heard you speak several times in Virginia Beach, and have heard you say on more than one occasion that you run one of the biggest mental health hospitals in the state of Virginia, which it sounds like you do. So just as a healthcare person and understanding how mental health works, I'm glad to hear that the CSBs are involved and that, you know, your prisoners leave jail with their meds on board and with follow-up appointments. But my question is, you know, what happens after that? And it's all about continuity of care, right? So we're treating this mental health crisis, but we know that mental health diagnoses, that can be a lifelong diagnosis. So what are we doing for follow-up? I've had concerns about this in the past and wanted, you know, healthcare providers in the home, but making sure that they're compliant. They're compliant with taking their meds. They're compliant with going yes to that initial follow-up appointment. But from then on, I mean, it needs many months and many years sometimes of follow-up to make sure that they're compliant with their mental health treatment plan so that they can stay out of the jail, so that your recidivism rate, you know, is lower. So I guess my question is, you know, what is in place, and is it through the CSB, and is that where we're lacking, that we're not providing follow-up care and continuum of care long enough, that we're having a positive effect in keeping people out of prisons?
Well, I think, Jen, what you have to do is you have to recognize that my ability to touch this problem only goes so far. And my ability is to make sure they have the treatment in the facility, that we identify them in this facility. When I first came here, my views had changed 100%. I thought that the mental health did not belong in the jails, and they shouldn't be in the jails, and they can't treat them in the jail. And I was complaining I was the largest healthcare provider in Virginia. I have 600 inmates, more than 600 inmates that are mentally ill, and closer to 800 inmates that are mentally ill. And so I've changed my mind over that, because I've talked to a number of people, and I don't think that there's any other system that can deal with the mentally ill as well as sheriffs can, if they're willing to do it. And you have to identify them when they come in, because a lot of these people go unidentified for years, and they don't get the medication they need. And so I think you need to identify them when they come in, and you have to treat them when they're in there. And then I think the most important thing is have that continuum of care so that they receive the care that they need when they get out. And that's where my connection with the system dies, because I think that, the CSBs are the ones that have to provide that care and make sure that they're receiving the treatment that they need. And I think that, they do a fairly good job of that, but their resources are limited as well. And I think that, if I had to put my finger on the problem, I'd say I don't think that somebody recognizes the depth of the problem or the scope of the problem, and that, it's underfunded. And I've been up there where I've tried to get more money for mental illness, and I've not been successful in doing it because the vast majority of the people haven't been touched by the mental illness problem. And if you find somebody that understands the mental illness problem, they've probably been touched by it, that had a family member that's involved in it or mentally ill. And so I think that, I think it's one of the greatest responsibilities the state has is to protect these people, because I think that, it's a death sentence if they don't, if they have 100% recidivism rate, it's a death sentence to them if they come to jail. And so I think that's a bad thing. And I think we can control a little bit in jails, but I think we need to help financially to do that.
Thank you, Sheriff Stolle. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your public service and your passion. You gave us some good ideas, and we wish you the very best. And I'm sure at some point you'll be invited back to speak to your colleagues, to the senators who are now in the seats that you and your earlier generation held. Thank you so very much. And we will move on to our next speaker, who is Valerie Boykin. Valerie is the director of the Department of Juvenile Justice. We are moving into the juvenile justice area. Valerie previously was the director of community programs for DJJ and as the court service unit director for the 4th District Judicial Court. She has more than 30 years of experience in juvenile justice and human services. She began her career as a juvenile probation officer in the 22nd Court Service Unit, that would be Franklin County, and then as a probation officer, family counselor, and intake supervisor in Norfolk. So I'd like to welcome Valerie Boykin, and I believe we will have a PowerPoint presentation. Thank you, Valerie, for taking time to present to the committee.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I thank you for this opportunity to join you as you have a conversation about juvenile justice reform. Madam Chair, can you see my PowerPoint at this time?
Yes, we can.
Great. I believe this is my first opportunity to actually speak to the committee. So again, I thank you for the opportunity as you talk about additional issues around juvenile justice reform. Today, I'd like to share with you a high-level overview of the department and also give you an update on our transformation efforts that have been underway for over 5 years at this point in time. I should also indicate that I was appointed director April of last year. So again, I appreciate finally getting to speak with you.
Welcome.
DJJ provides day-to-day operations of 32 court service units across the Commonwealth, and they provide intake, probation, and parole services in addition to other services as warranted by those communities. We also currently oversee operations at one juvenile correctional center, our remaining one Bonnier Juvenile Center. And then we provide oversight, we certify and we approve plans for a number of other operations around the state that you'll see on the slide here. I wanted to share with you a little bit of the impetus for transformation that began in 2014 with planning phases. The department had undergone a series of budget cuts over the years and had whittled down the array of services across the state to only 3 remaining facilities. We no longer had halfway houses, and a lot of other services that had been previously available were no longer there. There had been a series of consultant reports completed, most of whom recommended smaller, safer facilities, and basically an overhaul of our operations, which were out of date and yielding poor results for young people. We determined that a lot of our young people had experienced major traumas in their lives. We had racial inequities in the system, and we had no continuum of alternative placements. And so the most recent study completed at the end of 2014 was done by the Annie Casey Foundation that also led to task force report that was completed in 2016 as mandated by the General Assembly. I wanted to highlight a few significant facts about our population that we serve. Virginia has about 20% African-American children in the Commonwealth, but if you look at this graphic, it shows you that at every major decision point in our system, young people of color are overrepresented. And so you'll see that at the intake stage for detentions, and particularly with direct care, most young people who penetrate our system and committed are of color, almost 70%. If you look at the white and other population, which is 80% of our population, the numbers are actually reversed. And we realized that we needed to do something about this. This slide gives you an overview of the trauma that our young people have experienced. And so there's a pretty long list here, but you'll see that 95% of all the young people who actually penetrate the system and are committed have at least one of these factors, and yet 67% have 3 or more. So DJJ introduced a transformation plan that focused on reduce, reform, replace, and sustain. The next few slides will highlight for you some of the efforts in this particular framework. And so in the interest of time, I won't focus on a lot of it, but we wanted to reduce the over-reliance in secure care. We wanted to reform our practices in secure care to become more rehabilitative instead of punitive in our efforts. We knew we needed to engage with families in new and different ways. We wanted to replace our current facilities with state-of-the-art facilities to place young people closer to home. And again, we knew that our most recent addition to the framework was sustain. As we develop practices, how do we implement them in ways that they can be sustained over time? This slide shows you major changes in the numbers of kids we serve. And I should probably add at the beginning that 10 years ago, we actually had 850 youth committed to state care. And as of the end of 2019, we had 335. So significant decreases in kids at every decision point in the system. We are diverting more kids. Fewer and fewer kids are placed on probation. We are using tools to make decisions, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a coming slide. But overall, our numbers are drastically reduced. I should add that during the COVID-19 period, since about mid-March, our numbers are further reduced. So our 2020 data, which is not yet available, will show you even additional decreases, some of which is contributed to COVID, and some, again, are on ongoing efforts to reduce the population. We have successfully and safely transitioned over 100 kids out of direct care since March, I might add. Court service unit practice improvement is the first area I'd like to highlight for you. So the sheriff talked about jail diversions. DJJ has focused a lot on diversions for juveniles coming into our system. And that might be young people coming on school complaints, it might be citizen complaints, but we have ramped up our diversion activities as allowed by the Code of Virginia. And we collaborate with private partners, we collaborate with CSBs, we work with local FAP teams through the Children's Services Act, and we also deliver some diversion services ourselves in some of our court service units. We, like much of the country, are focused on evidence-based practices. We want to introduce what works with young people in our system. And so you'll see a list of things here that we've introduced over the past few years that represent new practices. What I'd like to highlight for you here are the structured decision-making tools that we are using. An area of concern that I already mentioned is the overrepresentation of children of color. And so we've developed some tools to try to take away some of the subjectivity in decision-making. So the DAI stands for Detention Assessment Instrument. And so young people need to score a certain point to be considered for detention, as opposed to us using whim or our feelings about whether or not they should be detained. We use a youth assessment and screening instrument that looks at risk level for young people, but also looks at their needs as we're determining what course of action should be taken if they become court involved. And then the most recent thing that we introduced earlier this year, after a couple of years of piloting and working with Commonwealth attorneys and judges and others in the community, is our standardized dispositional matrix. And this particular tool helps guide us in recommendations that we make for the court. In many situations, everybody was placed on probation, and we know that not every young person needs probation. And so it gives a range of alternatives that we might recommend to the court, and again, takes out some of the subjectivity. We believe that the right youth needs the right intervention at the right time, And we're trying to focus on the right dosage of that intervention as well. In terms of our residential services, we began by looking at length of stay guidelines, and those guidelines were adopted by our board in late 2015, and they reduced the amount of time that most young people stay in care. And it was based on looking at the data, looking at the tipping points for how long they actually need for treatment and when it's most effective to release them. And most young people are released given within the guidelines these days. We consolidated our last remaining juvenile correctional centers in 2017 by the closure of Beaumont. And so the only large remaining facility is Bonnier. And as you know, we have plans to replace Bonnier with smaller facilities, and that work is ongoing. We changed our treatment model at the facility to focus on a community treatment model where young people are learning skills, they're practicing skills, they live in a peer community environment where a lot of the support is provided to them through those group settings and group sessions. We have increased our alternative placements for young people significantly. We now have 10 community placement programs in detention centers around the Commonwealth. And so when appropriate, young people are placed closer to home and receive their treatment through a contractor program with the local detention center. We've also expanded our detention reentry programs through those detention facilities and a wider array of private residential programs. We spend a lot of time focusing on expanding a continuum of placements. And some of those are residential and some of those are non-residential because we'd like to focus on providing resources to the community kids before they're ever even considered by the court for commitment. Our educational offerings have expanded. We have contracts, for instance, with community colleges for young people as they receive their diplomas or GEDs and still need to stay in our care. And we're working diligently with families in new and different ways and continuing to try to expand that work. A student government association was created, giving leadership abilities to young people to try to teach them to work with us as we care for them. And they also develop their own personal action plans these days. Instead of the department just telling them what they need to do upon release, they need to have ownership and buy into what's going to happen to them as they re-enter their community. This particular slide shows the expanded use of alternatives versus secure residential care. And so you'll see through January of this year, a significant reduction in placing young people in large juvenile correctional center versus an alternative. I want to highlight here that, as I said earlier, our population has changed drastically. At the beginning of transformation, we had about 600 youth in care. Again, at the end of last year, just over 300, but the majority of them now are actually high-risk offenders. 86% of them have very serious charges, felony charges, mostly charges against the person. And a significant number of them also, as we speak today, over 100 of them at Bonnier have blended sentences. That means when they leave us, they move on to the adult correctional system. We have worked diligently on improving our reentry practices as well as services available. And you'll see here in the last bullet, we have expanded those programs to introduce over the last few years 3 reentry programs that had formerly gone away. Some years ago, we had halfway houses and due to budget cuts, they were all closed. So we continue to work on those arrangements and other private programs to provide services to young people as they leave our facilities. I mentioned earlier, we're expanding our continuum of services. We do that largely through 2 regional service coordinator groups that are regionally based, and they've helped us to develop a full array of evidence-based programs. We continue to work on that, by the way. And over 4,000 services were provided last fiscal year to almost 2,000 youth. And these are not committed youth. Again, the bulk of the services are for young people in the community who cannot be diverted safely, but need services. And many of our new evidence-based programs are family-based, like MST and FFT. As a matter of fact, the Department of Social Services and the Department of Medical Assisted Services have used our model as they're developing the Families First model, which you may be familiar with. Very quickly, this is a map that just shows you the array of MST and FFT locations around the Commonwealth. This was a bit of a heavy lift for us, but we're pleased that we now can serve almost all of the localities in the Commonwealth. Every dot that you see on this map represents a case planning team that can serve 90 a 90-minute radius. So we've almost blanketed the state. This slide shows you the array of alternative placements available to us through contracts and other continuum placements instead of relying just on a juvenile correctional center for those young people who penetrate the system. And then lastly, I just want to share with you a few things about our ongoing work, because it's not done. We know we need to continue to work on reducing young people who get new charges. We have a pretty strong framework, but it needs to be continued. We have a need for new facilities. There was a General Assembly study completed, a task force created, and a study completed in 2016 that identified the need for new state-of-the-art facilities, smaller facilities. They need to be therapeutically sound. They need to be built and designed in a way that doesn't reinstitute the trauma that many of the young people have experienced. And we desire that they be smaller in nature. DJJ has put forth an effort to build smaller 60-bed facilities. That work is ongoing with the Department of General Services. And we know we need to be fair and equitable in our treatment of young people. As I mentioned earlier, we've started by developing tools, but we also are training and educating staff about biases and the things that we as a system might be doing that contribute to that. We don't own it because we don't charge people, we don't bring them into our system, but we want to make sure that the things that we do when they come into our care are fair. We've developed positive youth development principles, safety, connection, fairness, and purpose. We believe they're critical in all the work that we do with our young people, but also with staff. We are continuing to try to engage with community groups and other stakeholders, including Rise for Youth that you'll hear from shortly behind me. We've had conversations and we continue in conversation to find agreement on things that we can work on. We are engaging with the Chiefs of Police Association to talk about expanding some of our diversion work, perhaps in partnership with law enforcement. We're also having conversations with folks from the Haywood Burns Conversation and Me Productions about new resilience tools and things that we might look at implementing, particularly in our urban communities that might have a greater impact on youth of color. In addition to those stakeholder engagement activities, we continue to work with our other children's service agencies on various collaborative activities, all of which are meant to make sure that we have the best interests of children and families at hand in our work and always at the forefront of our work. So with that, I provide for you my contact information. We have an array of resources and information available on our website. I invite you to go there. We provide regular updates through our transformation reports annually. We have been collecting a data resource guide for well over 10 years, and you'll have lots of data available to you there, but please reach out and I'm available if you have questions now. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boykin. Your presentation was succinct and it looks like you're doing some great work. Are there questions, colleagues? I don't see any hands raised or. Okay, we will move on to our next speaker. Again, Ms. Boykin, we appreciate the time you've spent with the committee. We have your slide presentation. If questions come up, we know where to find you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Sure. Okay, our next speaker is also going to discuss juvenile justice reform. Her name is Valerie Slater. She is the executive director of Rise for Youth. So Rise for Youth is a group that advocates for changes in the juvenile justice system. Ms. Slater has worked at the Virginia Indigent Defense Commission. She served as a staff attorney at the Disability Law Center, and she's also served as a juvenile justice attorney at the Legal Aid Justice Center. She's an advocate for the rights of our youth who are involved in the juvenile justice system. And I look forward to hearing from Ms. Slater. And I know that Rise for Youth has done some very good work. So I believe she's in the queue.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and
welcome.
Panel. Thank you so much for having Rise for Youth here with you today. We also have a presentation for you, and I am going to allow our Strategic Engagement Director, James Braxton, to present this presentation because he is very succinct with it. So I am going to turn it over to him for presentation, and I will be back once he is
You'll
done.
be around for questions.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is James Braxton, and I know we have an abbreviated time together, so I will be short with my words, but as concise as I can. And so I want to share from the perspective of myself being an impacted community member coming from Hampton and Newport News, and as a young person, being caught up in the violence. It was me and my friends that were shooting up the carnivals, me and my friends that were running in people's houses, robbing them, and we were causing a lot of trouble. And I stand before you today being transformed. So I want to make sure that, my perspective is clear as I am a representative of the impacted community. And I also want to share that in our support of the department's transformation, we at one point want to be clear that we do support it. However, we still strive to collaborate on one particular area, which is secure care. And so I want to share with you some details about the legislation that we introduced this year, which is Healthy Community Secure Care legislation. HCSC, Healthy Community Secure Care, says that youth should be held accountable for restoring the harm they cause by making it right themselves with the support and discipline of their own community. Healthy Community Secure Care is based on the idea that we can merge local prevention and reentry initiatives with the state interventions provided to youth within their own community. As we developed this concept, we relied on the input from various community members that included Virginia Union University students, Norfolk State University students, James Madison University students, William and Mary students, grassroots organizations across the state, as well as impacted families, youth, and elected officials. One of the ways in which we were able to engage, and one of the reasons why we thought it was important to engage, is because a lot of community members, we understand, did not know what direct care was or what secure care was. And so we also heard through the DJJ's transformation and trying to close Bon Air and open 2 new facilities, folks needed to understand how that was going to impact their youth and their families and their environment. We also heard that a lot of families wouldn't want it in their area. And what we found in giving the survey is that a lot of that isn't true. It's just a matter of impacted communities not being as well informed as they could. And so if you draw your attention to some of the questions we asked on the survey, which we can collaborate to share the full survey after this, but one of the questions asked, what type of security fencing would be appropriate for a facility located within 2 miles of your neighborhood? And as you can see, overwhelmingly, folks said no fencing. Another question said, what style building would you prefer to see if a secure care facility was placed within 2 miles of your home or business? Overwhelmingly, folks said a community center. So as you can see, folks across the state have been engaged in this conversation. And even if you look towards the bottom of this particular graph, when we asked what the room should look like where youth will be housed, they not only answered that it should look like a college dorm room, which was their feedback, but they also shared what else could go in it that would help the young person. And this is feedback directly from the community. So one community member said, carefully chosen books which focus on self-awareness, self-love, the power of now, leadership, decision-making. Youth will benefit from these positive reads and conversation that may occur from these type of books. For community members that don't want this in their backyard per se, or don't want to deal with a facility in their neighborhood, we believe they wouldn't have this type of feedback if they didn't think that it would be critical to youth rehabilitation and the rehabilitation of their neighborhood. Another way that we engaged in wanting to make this concept tangible to elected officials and community members was we hosted a seat at the table tour, which was a day of learning. And on this day of learning, we wanted to show the potential for spaces in the Richmond community in Central Virginia that could be repurposed for secure care. And so we chose 3 different locations. And on the tour, we included elected officials, we included education specialists, we included mental health specialists, construction specialists, young people, and impacted families. And as we walked through the tour, everyone gave their perspective as to what it would take and how much it would cost to repurpose that potential site for secure care. On this graph, you'll see at the top, right, this is the model that DJJ proposed in Chesapeake as well as Isle of Wight. And on the bottom, this is the tangible model that we worked with community to create as it would look within the neighborhood that is impacted. So a couple of points of contrast. The rule model does not allow for true collaboration. As you can see, rule models such as proposed in Isle of Wight County are in the middle of nowhere and doesn't allow for true community collaboration because it doesn't include components that actually make up a community. The HCSC model increases the probability of collaboration and organic relationships that are critical for youth rehabilitation. The rule model promises economic growth, but unwanted development in that area. That same economic growth could support impacted communities and drive job creation. Poverty, as we know it, is a core driver of crime. Rural areas are not friendly to the relocation of existing staff who want to remain employed. And so as you can see in contrast, the transformation itself is a wonderful idea, but it has to make sense for the communities where the most young people are coming from. As it relates to the impact in communities, I want to draw your attention to the proposal that was made in Chesapeake and a couple of things that stood out about the project characteristics and the positive impacts. And the only reason I bring this up is because I want to share that unless we have a clear vision of how we're going to deal with the root cause of young people being in there in the first place and really deal with resources and economic development going towards those neighborhoods, all of our efforts collectively won't really matter. And so what you'll see highlighted is with this project, the 40% of residents of the juvenile correctional centers in Virginia call Hampton Roads home. For economic perspective, the construction and operation of a new JCC in Chesapeake will create employment opportunities both at the facility and local establishments that serve the employees of the JCC, which is great. Unfortunately, though, that type of development should be happening in areas where we know are impacted by poverty and high crime. And so to draw your attention to the bottom, we believe if this project were to make a positive impact, then as you can see, what the priorities was increased vegetative cover and increased wildlife and wildlife habitat. And while that's wonderful for the rural area, again, if we really want to deal with the root cause of why young people are getting incarcerated in the first place, and we look at the fact that poverty is tied to youth incarceration, then we should be drawing all of our resources and economic development to those areas, which ultimately will impact public safety. I want to draw your attention to this slide, the collaborative continuum model. On your left-hand side, this was developed by the group of Virginia Union University students through a visiting session. And smack in the middle, you'll see their vision for secure care within impacted community. And all around it, you can see the components that actually make up a community, which include college institutions, schools, mental health agencies, both local and private, community centers, law enforcement, public transit, public housing, and clergy and faith-based community. All of these components make up a community. And as we sat there and thought about how these entities could support young people and their families within the institution, they were saying things like provide restorative justice and provide extra mentorship and self-care, financial literacy. All of these things happen within community, and we think will make public safety and young people's rehabilitation and reintegration back into the community stronger. A couple of benefits that we see for healthy community secure care being located within the neighborhood or the community within 1 to 2 miles allow committed youth to be agents of change within their own communities. And to share an example of that, one of the great things that we were able to celebrate that the department was able to do was allow young people to host a block party, which I believe was last year at Bon Air. And if you look at the pictures, you'll see all the elected officials, you'll see, leadership staff, and you'll see some of the families, which I believe it was an impactful event. But with healthy community secure care, that event would have allowed young people's peers and their family members and their brothers and, their uncles and whoever else that may be still in the community causing harm to see them as agents of change and put forth some positive rehabilitation and reinforcement that they also can transform. And so unfortunately, that type of transformation is not captured in evidence-based data, but it is critical to transformation and youth rehabilitation. Secondly, promote local and state collaboration that strengthens local violence prevention and restorative justice initiatives. Economic development within impacted communities, decrease recidivism by increasing the success of reintegration, increase employment and career development opportunities for returning citizens, and supports the continuum of care by investment in grassroots collaboration and the creation of diverse funding streams. Thirdly, if you look at this graph, you'll see on the left-hand side, this is directly information from the department's data resource guide, and you'll see listed the CSUs across the state. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the two concentrated areas where the most young people are being committed. If you draw down even further and look at the zip codes of where these young people are coming from, you can make those circles even smaller. And so as we proposed our legislation this year, unfortunately, when the fiscal impact came back, it was inflated and said that we needed 7 facilities to make this successful. And unfortunately, if you look at this graph and the actual need, if we're focused on the actual need and where young people are coming from, it's not going to take 7 facilities if we're relying on the collaboration of local CPPs and other out-of-home placements, along with the new structured facilities that should be happening in collaboration with community. Lastly, what should happen next? We should understand the process that the Department of General Services used for searching for appropriate land at Hampton Roads. We continue to hear that they surveyed the land and they didn't find anything. But for community, I think we deserve, and the community deserves, to know what that search actually entailed. Who did you talk to? Who did you collaborate with? Were you on the ground, and for how long? Because coming from Hampton and Newport News myself, I could go down there right now and find 4 or 5 potential places that could be repurposed. And so for an entire Department of General Services not to find anything, the community finds that troubling. Create a community approved model with community before actually trying to sell it to them. And so as we continue to hear communities don't want this, we at Rise for Youth believe the engagement has to be in reverse. We can't just go to the community and say, this is what we're putting here. We have to include the community and say, what would you like to see in your neighborhood? Help us build this out. You get the community's buy-in and you collaborate with the community truly. And then that way they'll feel more comfortable moving forward with whatever this is going to look like, knowing that it's going to positively impact their families and the community they live in. Schedule community information sessions within impacted communities. Create a community-led advisory board that is responsible for the direction, implementation, and revision of what these facilities are going to look like. Develop collaborative messaging that encourages partnership and community investment. Launch with an authentic press conference standing beside grassroots community. That, again, is how you gain buy-in. You first have to go to the community leaders, get the community leaders to buy in, get their input, make sure what they see in this proposal is a reflection of what their true needs are, and then that's how you move forward. Finally, we believe that as our legislation is moving into a study, the most critical part of the study should potentially be scheduling a seat at the table tour for Hampton Roads, where we would search for appropriate spaces to include, again, youth, families, mental health specialists, education, construction specialists, and legislators. And during that tour, we should get an actual budget cost of what it's going to take to repurpose that facility so that we can have an actual fiscal analysis of what it's going to take to build out healthy community secure care and continue to support the department's transformation by closing Bon Air and potentially opening 2 new facilities. I'll turn it back over to Valerie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. And so, yes, I will now take questions from anyone that may have them, but I also just want to share, intentionally James did that presentation. As he shared, he was one of the young people causing that very harm. And, he found himself on the path to serving some serious time, but was able to turn his life around. And I'm so grateful that he is on staff here with us at Rise for Youth. So, I also add it's incredibly important to realize and to recognize that when we want to do something to really impact how we are treating our children, we've got to remember that they are a part of a family first. And when we look at the family, if we recognize that the family and the community that that family is, if they're all struggling, and we're anticipating that we're going to take children and create something that is going to help them transform their lives without also impacting that family and impacting that community, we will continue to see the recidivism rate as it is. It continues to hover in the 70% at the 3-year mark for kids being in trouble again, for them being reconvicted of crime. And so we've got to begin at community, recognizing that communities are comprised of families. Families have children, and children sometimes make mistakes. And we've got to support them in the ways that are going to be most beneficial to the whole. So with that, I'll take any questions that you may have.
Okay, I'm going to go into my participant list here and see if anybody has raised a hand. Colleagues, if you have a question, would you please speak up? I just have one comment that might be helpful for the entire committee. I know last year, Senator Locke submitted a bill that had a lot to do with community centers and sort of a smaller family-like setting for the care of our youth. And I'd like you to go over some of the elements of the bill. I see Senator Locke has joined us. So perhaps either Valerie or Senator Locke can talk about that bill. I thought it was a very worthwhile bill. I understand that it probably got derailed in the Finance Committee. But Senator Locke, do you want to go?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Mavola. I actually have a question with regard to that. If Valerie or James could delve a little bit more into that with regard to, we always talk about costs and how much it's going to cost to go into the secure care model. If you could talk a little bit about, because they talked a lot about how much it was going to cost to do the model that you outlined. Could you talk about the savings that it would accrue to the Commonwealth if we went into the type of secure care model that you are outlining?
Valerie,
So,
would you like to take that?
Yes. And so I'm going to begin with the greatest savings from this particular model. It will be in the long run. We will reduce recidivism when we have the needs of community and family and not just of the child. So as we are pouring resources into a particular community that may now be economically deprived, the education system and other systems are not as robust as they need to be to create even community members. With this model, the monies, every rehabilitative dollar is going into impacted communities. And so that will necessarily cause a transformation of not just children, but of the community itself. And as the community begins to heal and transform, the actions of the children and of the community members will also change and transform. We won't have children going into a remotely placed facility and learning one way of interaction, but then being dropped back into communities that have not changed at all, and having to then revert back to what they had learned and how they had known to survive in that particular setting, and then ending up in trouble again. So number one, with recidivism going way down, we'll stop spending those same dollars over and over again. Secondly, we look at collaborations with all of the providers that are contracted with the Department of Juvenile Justice right now. There is a difference between the providers who are serving children in secure care versus the providers that are serving children that are in community and are a part of diversion programming. If we build within community in these smaller settings, then those same providers are able to provide services to the children who are in community and to the children who are inside the facility. And you are exponentially cutting the amount that it is going to cost to provide services when you are using the same pool of providers for both sets of children. There's no need to create one of our partners, the Commonwealth Institute of Fiscal Analysis, the way she framed it, Laura Gorin, she said, we should not be running mini prisons. They should not be, excuse me, they should not be self-contained environments with every single service happening within and having to pay a whole nother set of invoices for these folks who are inside. If they are providing services in the community, if they're already contracted for that, they ought to also be providing children services to those children who are in this secure care model. And so when we begin to recognize that we don't need two sets of service providers, but one that is skilled enough to provide all of the services that are needed, that will also exponentially save money.
I have one question. Something you said really sparked a green light in my mind. It may be a greater continuum of care if the provider had already served that child before the youth was incarcerated. So in effect, you're really providing a continuum of care where a new provider doesn't have to get to know the child again. So that's an interesting concept.
Absolutely correct. You know, imagine that the child transfers out or transitions out of that secure setting with the same therapist, with the same mentor, and is able to just continue on and, you know, and develop into that strong young person that we know that they all are. Their potential that has been unfortunately derailed to go in non-traditional ways of getting those same things that every child wants. You know, every child wants the extra pocket money. Every child wants the new phone. Every child wants the new shoes. Every child wants, you know, those things, right? And if we as the community has failed to provide avenues for these things for every child, that is a failing of community. That's not the failing of the child. They just happen to be at the tail end of it and reaping the unfortunate consequence.
Yes, I understand. Okay, I'm going to check one more time. Colleagues, does anybody have a question or a comment? These presentations were very good. I want to give a shout out to James. Thank you for joining us. Your presentation was great, and we are all very proud of your progress. You certainly are an impressive young man, and we wish you the best in your future endeavors. I don't have any further questions for you. Thank you, Ms. Slater. We appreciate your work, and thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Locke, for coming forward and joining the team and talking a little bit about how important it is for this community care model. So,
Senator Favola, I just want to add that what happened with the legislation is that it was continued to 2021. So we are continuing a discussion on it with Finance and Appropriations in terms of how we're going to move forward.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to seeing your legislation again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep at it.
We're not giving up.
Oh, good. Glad to hear that. Okay.
And if I could just thank you all so very much for having Rise for Youth and for passing the legislation through this committee. When it came to committee, you passed it unanimously. And so thank you for the support of this very much needed legislation for our young people, families, and communities.
Thank you. Okay, colleagues, we're moving on to our last speaker. And our last speaker is Harold Clark, who is the director of the Department of Corrections, Virginia Department of Corrections. Director Clark has more than 40 years of experience in the corrections field. He started his career at the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services and then served at the Washington State Department of Corrections and the Massachusetts Department of Corrections. So he has had a broad breadth and scope of experience. He is also the 2019 recipient of the Clements Award, an award presented by the National Correctional Leaders Association for demonstrating virtues of vision, mission, innovation, reform, and the fair and effective treatment of offenders from from incarceration through their reentry into communities. So please welcome Harold Clark. Mr. Clark, have you been able to join us? We see your presentation, but we don't hear you. I really don't know what has happened. I will ask the clerk. Is there a technical problem connecting? Ms. Griffin?
Mary, like Director Clark is on mute.
Can he be advised to unmute himself? Or can we unmute him?
Madam Chair, this is David May. I think he needs to do two things. He needs to unmute his mic, and then on the PowerPoint screen, if you can hear us, go to Enable Editing at the top and click that, and then it should allow you to go to Slideshow and view. Enable Editing. If you hit that Enable Editing button.
I did. I guess I'm not hitting it. Somebody else is.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay.
Welcome,
Hey,
Director Clark.
I apologize about that.
Yeah.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As mentioned, my name is Harold Clark, and I'm so pleased for the opportunity to present to you this morning, specifically about the reentry efforts and initiatives within the Department of Corrections. So, as you all know, our business is public safety. Our mission is public safety. But we also believe that we are in the business of helping people to be better. And we say so because by helping folks be better, that means that we're addressing their needs, their deficits. And by so doing, we are helping them to go back into the community to be able to be law-abiding citizens and accessing the legitimate economy. So as of June 20th of 2020, we had 102,317 individuals under the care of the Virginia DOC. 27,310 inmates are in custody in facilities operated by the DOC. That number is down by 3,000 since the onset of the pandemic. 68,630 individuals are being supervised in the community on probation and parole by our staff, and approximately 6,377 individuals are state responsible that are being housed in local and regional jails. The department operates 26 major institutions. We have 8 field units, 6 work centers, 43 distinct probation and parole districts, and 6 community correction program facilities. So the Virginia DOC is a leader in corrections in this country. Today, we have the lowest rate of recidivism of 23.1%, and we have led the nation with the lowest rate of recidivism for the last 4 years. Just to give you some comparison, so here we are at 23.1%. The national average is right about 42%, and the outlier, the state with the highest rate of recidivism, sits at 62%. These accomplishments are the result of our focus on safety and security, effective evidence-based programming, and organizational development. We think all of those things have to be happening simultaneously for us to be successful, but we cannot go without mentioning the support that we've also gotten from the legislature and from Governor Northam and his two predecessors. The mission of the department, as I mentioned, is ensuring public safety. We like to distinguish between long-term and short-term public safety. Short-term public safety is what we achieve with incapacitation. We lock folks up, we keep them from, prevent them from escaping, etc. And also with effective supervision in the community. Now, we only achieve that short-term public safety while those measures are in place. They're incarcerated or they're being supervised in the community. What we're after is long-term public safety. And that long-term public safety is what we gain, what is realized with change, helping to change the individuals to be able to respond to their needs. So these are just some things that we are doing right now in the department, just a small list of things that we are doing to change the environment. We understand that we are only going to be successful to the degree that the culture of the organization allows us to be successful. So we are focusing on things like evidence-based practices within the organization. We're focusing on dialogue, not only for staff, but we train staff and our training offenders in dialogue as well to promote better engagement and communications. We have certain things like learning teams that we belong to. All members belong to learning teams. Diversity is a major issue within the department. And so therefore we have a diversity council that is at liberty to take a look at everything that impacts diversity and all types of diversity within the organization and have a direct connection to myself, the director, and the executive team. We pride ourselves in being a learning organization, and we go out and take a look at things that are non-traditional, not necessarily just correction specific, but we read extensively. There's a director's reading list that comprises of about 28 books right now that staff read, and we get ideas and so forth to address the myriad of challenges that we face. And we provide leadership training to all of our executive staff, all of our unit heads. So we believe that reentry begins at the first contact with DOC. May be someone being placed directly by the courts on probation, or somebody being paroled, or somebody coming in to a correctional institution. And the reentry continuum is played out from the point of that first contact to the point that they discharge successfully off of probation and or parole. The DOC follows evidence-based practices as mentioned before. We use an instrument, it's called COMPASS. It's a risk and needs instrument. And every offender coming into the system is given the COMPASS. And we use the information that we get from the COMPASS to develop individualized case plans for the offenders. And the programs and the things that the COMPASS indicates we need to be sharing with the offenders are all evidence-based programs. It also comes replete with incentives and sanctions as well. And we are always evaluating cases and programs to make sure that we are on the right track, and where necessary, we make changes and we make adaptations as we go along. So the DOC's commitment to programs is paramount. As mentioned before, all of our programs are evidence-based programs and of a cognitive nature. That is, they are to instill comprehension, learning on the part of the client. And we offer such programs as anger management, criminal thinking, life skills for all of our inmates. We offer victim impact programming as well to help the inmate understand the impact that they are having on victims, or that they had on their victims by the crimes that they committed. And we also have extensive workforce development programs as well. We also have special population type programs for sex offenders, the seriously mentally ill, and substance abusing offenders. In corrections today, in a number of areas, the focus on females is an afterthought. That is, institutions are designed, programs are designed primarily for male offenders, and then females are placed into those programs. What we have decided doing in Virginia is to take a look at nationally best practices for female inmates, and to have a gender responsive approach to make sure that the women that are receiving these programs are getting programs that are specific for women, and that they are able to have the appropriate responses to be successful. What we have done in Virginia is that we have three regions, an eastern, a central, and a western region. We have centralized all female facilities and programming, etc., within the central region to make sure that we have consistency and continuity of programming. We also have purchased an instrument, a risk instrument specific for the needs of female offenders, a risk and need instrument. We provide non-traditional career programming for the female offenders. We are in the process right now of developing a nursery for women who have their children while incarcerated, that those kids can stay with them for a while, and we can teach them parenting and make sure that those children are getting a good beginning on life. We also have programs that we're developing for enhanced family reunification for these females, again, in the central region. We recognize that a lot of justice-involved women experience a lot of trauma in their lives prior to coming into the system. So we also have a focus on trauma programming specifically, and we're infusing trauma initiatives within other programs that they are being provided as well. And we also have a gender responsive program curriculum that we're offering at several of our female institutions. So the DOC is dedicated to education. That's a major part of our reentry initiative. Today, right about 50% of the individuals that enter our custody have a GED or high school diploma. Right about 48% of those individuals are reading at or below the 8th grade level. So it's important for us then to address those needs, those deficits that they present if we're going to help them to be successful. We also provide college programming. Currently, there are 4 community colleges that we are working with that provide college programming using the Pell Grants for the inmates. Additionally, those inmates that can afford to pay for college programs themselves are so doing. No state dollars are being used for college programming. We also provide career and technical education. And the offenders, the inmates, are able to receive national certification for those programs, and also industry certifications. We also are able to provide them with apprenticeships. And the department itself have hired a number of individuals who were apprentices in areas within the department that went on to become actually state employees working for the DOC. Programs today target things such as HVAC, masonry, plumbing, sheet metal, computer systems technology, etc. In the area of the technology, we found that individuals who complete the career technical education programs, they're recidivating at a rate of 13.7%. And those who go on to just get a GED are recidivating at 19.1%. You may recall I told you earlier that we have an overall rate of recidivism of 23.1%. So you can see when they avail themselves of these types of programs, they're able to do a lot better. And that's why we promote education, and we are always wanting to find opportunities to expand the educational program that we're providing to the offenders. So offenders work at a variety of jobs within the Department of Corrections. For example, those who are working in food service, they're required to take Serve Save, which is a national certification program for food service. And they can use that with the experience to get working in food service in the department to get jobs in restaurants and so forth around the Commonwealth. And indeed, they're doing that. We have thousands of offenders in the last few years who have completed the Serve Safe training. We have wastewater operations at pretty much all of our institutions. And we have offenders, inmates working in those programs. They're able to get certification as well for the work that they're doing. As a matter of fact, we have hired most recently ex-offenders who were trained at the department working in our wastewater operations to come back to work for us as state employees. The same thing is true in the area of agribusiness. We have 8 full farms in the department. We have a relationship with Virginia Tech, wherein they come in and take care of our cattle, and we have a quid pro quo type relationship with them. We provide commercial driver's license certification, OSHA certification. Within the Virginia Correctional Enterprises, we have a variety of shops that makes everything from clothing, license plate to something that most people can relate to and are aware of, but we do a lot more than that. Braille programming, etc. And offenders receive certifications in all of those areas. We have a variety of building trades opportunities for them as well, and heavy equipment operations. And all of these work areas, these work opportunities, help the offenders as they put together their reentry package and prepare to be released. It's said that right about 80% of all offenders locked up, not only in Virginia, but across the United States, have a history of substance abuse. And so we have a variety of different types of substance abuse programming that we provide to the inmates as well. But we have a focus as well on the issue of opioids, because of, as we all know, that has exploded across our country. And so today we have 4 facilities that are involved with the MAT, that is the medication assisted treatment, and they are helping offenders who are discharging, providing the naltrexone, and then those offenders go out into the community, and the support is continued by the CSBs, helping them to beat their opioid epidemic, or opioid addictions rather. Our community corrections alternative programs, which I mentioned earlier, and those are a form of probation, the highest form of probation, wherein a judge actually sends them to the department and they're housed in special units in the department. Those 6 facilities are also targeting the opioid crisis extensively. Sheriff Starley spoke about the mental health experience before, and we are seeing that in the Department of Corrections as well. Approximately 31% of the inmates in the VA DOC have some type of mental health impairment. They have a mental health diagnosis. And if you were to take out just females alone, females have about a 60% rate of mental health impairment or diagnosis. Approximately 18% of the inmates that are diagnosed with mental health issues are on psychotropic medications. And inmates with mental health issues have the highest rate of recidivism, along with those individuals, those state responsible offenders that did not come to the department, that served all of their times in regional and local jails. they have a rate of recidivism that is right about 27% compared, about 26.7% compared to the DOC rate of recidivism, which is much lower. And we provide levels of care for the individuals with mental health diagnoses ranging from acute outpatient all the way down to whatever it is that they need. We have intensive reentry programs. We have 16 institutions that have been designated as intensive reentry programs, and those are located strategically around the Commonwealth. And individuals prior to discharge, we try to get them there at least 18 months prior to discharge, are provided with intensive reentry programming at those locations. These are usually places that are closer to their homes as well. In these programs, they're able to get feedback and peer support and to practice the things that they have been taught and learning all along during their incarceration. They get a chance to practice their pro-social skills and to also finalize their transition planning. While they're there, we also work very closely with the DMV to also help to get them state identification that they can use as they try to secure employment and so forth. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we have an inmate workforce preparation initiative, and we provide employability skills and financial management training for the offenders. We provide resource fairs in several of our correctional centers, and for those in the community, we have job fairs that's promoted by several of our probation and parole districts. We also operate the bonding program, that is the DOC operates a federal bonding program for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that impacts not only those incarcerated within the DOC, but all individuals within the Commonwealth that are involved with justice. And every offender that's leaving the department, unless they choose not to cooperate, we get them enrolled for Medicaid before they discharge supervision. So in the interest of time, I spoke rather quickly and went through a lot of stuff without spending too much time in anything, but I just want to say in closing that our mission is to create lasting public safety. And we strive to be a learning organization driven by data in an effort to do so. We talk about cognitive restructuring programming, we talk with evidence-based data and so forth, and everything that we do is research, because resources are precious and limited. And so therefore, we believe in the need to transform the organization, that is our staff, our culture. We believe in the need to implement programs that have been proven to work for the offenders, and also to take a non-traditional stance and approach in many respects as it pertains to how we go about accomplishing our jobs. And it has been working for us because, as mentioned, for the last 4 years, we have had the lowest rate of recidivism in the United States. So, Madam Chair, I'll stop at that point, and I'll be glad to take any questions that you or your members may have.
Thank you, Director Clark. Colleagues, do you have questions?
Madam Chair, this is Jennifer Boysko.
Yes, Senator Boysko.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Clark. I really appreciate your comments today, and I've enjoyed meeting with you in the past to learn about the corrections system here in Virginia. As you and as Sheriff Stolle said, our interest is in having, safety in Virginia, and also helping people re-enter the community in a way that they're going to find success. And one of the presentation that you gave us, you were pointing out the evidence-based programs that you have in place here in Virginia. Sheriff Stolle talked about that we've been studying this for the whole scope of his 40-year career. I'm interested to hear from you what your opinion is of something like an earned sentence credit program that would help incentivize our inmates to participate in the programs that are offered and give them a pathway to getting back into the community in what we believe is a safe and reasonable method. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. If you think Virginia is ready for that, if we have the systems in place, and whatever you'd like to say about that. Thank you.
You know, I think that, thanks for the question. You know, offenders are motivated differently. And I think that any way that we can get them to make a commitment to improve themselves is something worth trying. And if someone is interested in becoming engaged to earn sentence reductions and so forth, I think we ought to try it. Because if that person is willing to go to those lengths to improve themselves, that person is one who is also most likely choosing to be an upstanding citizen and one who does not want to have a life involved in justice systems.
Very good. I believe that is a response to your question, Senator Boysko. Okay. Are there other questions for Director Clark? I do have one question, and it's regarding mental health services. I know you said folks who suffer mental health conditions are at higher risk of returning to our jails and prisons. We heard from Sheriff Stolle that in Virginia Beach, he works very closely with the CSB. They have a pretty robust safety net for individuals suffering from mental health conditions. What about the state? Do we actually provide enough mental health services? Do we need to buttress those services? Do we need better follow-up plans when individuals are released from our prisons?
Yes, we provide robust mental health services within the department. You may also be aware of the fact that we have a facility, the Marion Correctional Center, which is a mental health institution that provides acute care for individuals with acute mental health needs. And we provide mental health care in all our institutions, not to the same level as we do at Marion, for those who are committed to that facility. And when they're discharging, we make referrals through the probation and parole districts to the CSBs as well to continue their treatment. But what we have found is that the CSBs are autonomous. They're all independently operated. And so we have good relationships with several CSBs, but others choose not to prioritize the need for those who are leaving the Department of Corrections. So much so that a few years ago, I went back and spoke to Secretary Moran about this concern, and Secretary Moran, with the support of the governor and ultimately the legislature, decided to provide the Department of Corrections with mental health practitioners that we will then deploy in the community that will help reduce or to abate that problem that we're facing. So while we have that, it's still not enough. We could still use more support in mental health in the community, but I'm thankful for the support that we received from the legislature, the governor, and supported by Secretary Moran as well a few years ago to get those added positions.
Thank you. Sounds like there's more work to do in those areas, though.
There is.
Are there other questions from colleagues or? I'm looking through the participant list. I do not see any hands raised. I will ask once again, are there comments or questions? Okay, Director Clark, thank you so much. You gave us a lot of information. We have to digest that information. I'm sure we will be contacting you in the future. Criminal justice reform is an issue that we all care very deeply about, and we want to make some important progress in that area. So
thank you for the opportunity to present. Thank you.
Sure. I will ask our staff person, Mr. May, is there anything else on the agenda that we need to address this morning?
I don't think so, Madam Chair. We did have a period open for discussion, but if everyone's satisfied, I think we are good to go.
I will just ask our clerk, Ms. Griffin, could you just check one more time the chat box, participant list?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Please check the participant list to see if there are any hands up. I checked twice, but I want to make sure I didn't miss anything.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, colleagues, seeing that we have completed our business, thank you for those who were able to take time out of your busy schedule to join us. Thank you to all our presenters. And of course, always thank you to staff for helping pull this together. And the meeting of Rehab and Social Services is now adjourned.